first, nuclear war has again broken out in the Australian Federal Parliament, with Leader of the Opposition Peter Dutton finally announcing the Coalition's plan to bring nuclear power into Australia's energy mix. And I mean, really, that's the least the Coalition could do, considering how former Prime Minister Scott Morrison wigged out in 2021 by doing an overnight flip and signing Australia up to net zero by 2050, with no mention of nuclear at all, thus leaving Australia to the mercy of unreliable renewables like wind and solar, backed up by some sort of battery technology that doesn't actually exist yet. But I digress. The Coalition's plan involves building 7 nuclear plants, possibly with multiple reactors in each, on the sites of already existing coal mines which have either been discontinued or are slated to be discontinued sometime soon, in order to use the existing poles and wires at those sites to connect nuclear energy to the grid.
We need to make sure that our economy can function 24/7, and we can only do that with a strong baseload power. And today we announce 7 locations that we have looked at in great detail over a long period of time that can host new nuclear sites, and that will be part of an energy mix, obviously with renewables and significant amounts of gas into the system, particularly in the interim period. It will mean that on those end-of-life coal-fired power station sites, we can utilise the existing distribution network. This is a really important point.
Now, this is a reasonable argument to make, considering Labor's plan is to somehow build another 28,000 kilometres worth of transmission lines to connect their wind and solar farms to the grid, and have given no clear indication of where those new poles and wires will go. Remember, for all you foreigners watching, Australia is a massive country, and the majority of our land is uninhabitable because it's, desert, with maybe a tiny town or two dotted here and there in the midst of the red dirt. So wiring Australia up to a functional grid that includes a whole lot of renewable energy is much more difficult than if we were some tiny European country. The other thing for you foreigners to remember is that Australia currently has a ban on nuclear power, some sort of Chernobyl paranoia hangover. So Peter Dutton making a proposal such as this is incredibly radical, however sensible, and was always sure to draw some fierce opposition from the government, who is so emotionally attached to renewable energy. So attached that Labor's response to the announcement was not reasonable argument or logical counterpoints, but panic mixed with really low-tier memes inspired by popular satirical cartoon The Simpsons, such as this offering from Victorian Premier Jacinta Allen, depicting the famous Simpsons three-eyed nuclear-contaminated fish in Victoria's Gippsland, or this from Labor MP Andrew Leigh depicting a three-eyed Blinky Bill next to the nuclear power plant from The Simpsons, or this offering from the Labor-aligned Australian unions showing what the family dog will supposedly look like if Australia embraces nuclear power. Honestly, it's as if these players think, or want people to think, that a nuclear power plant is run like this.
Okay, men. Geiger counter's on.
I suppose that's normal background radiation, the kind you'd find in any well-maintained nuclear facility, or for that matter, playgrounds and hospitals.
Sorry. Gum used to seal crack in cooling tower.
I'm as shocked as you are.
Plutonium rod used as paperweight.
Oh, now that shouldn't be. Yeah, well, that's always been like that.
Just resting my eyes.
Ah, well done. A rested employee is a vigilant employee.
Or that nuclear waste looks like this.
Oh, this is the worst day ever.
Hi, Homer, what gives?
Mr. Burns is making me eat all these drums of toxic waste.
Jeez, that's rough. There must be 200-300 gallons in here.
Yeah, and even a teaspoon could cause a fatal tumor.
Now, I don't know whether the people perpetuating these memes are ignorant or lying, but either way, it shows how little Labor and the left thinks of the Australian public if it thinks the public's going to fall for Simpsons-inspired memes in a campaign against nuclear energy. After all, 33 countries around the world have nuclear as part of their energy mix, which, as Peter Dutton pointed out, makes their energy cheaper.
In the international experience, as we know, electricity is cheaper where there is a presence of nuclear energy. That is a fact.
Nevertheless, The cost of nuclear energy is going to be an issue, namely because since Australia has a ban on nuclear energy, it's impossible for us to really get an accurate read on what it might cost because it's not yet subject to market forces. Not even Dutton was able to give an accurate account of the cost in his announcement.
We'll have more to say in relation to the cost in due course, and as you know, we've done this in a step-by-step process. The focus today is on the sites.
Now, that's not good that the opposition won't provide any kind of costing yet, not just because they lose some of the credibility of the announcement about nuclear, but because it opens the door wide for Labor to scream about the ideologically opposed organisations who have tried to put a cost on nuclear in Australia. Certainly, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese did just that at a recent press conference.
Nuclear power is the most expensive form of new energy, and it requires a delay into the 2040s before we have a transition.
So where is Albanese getting that supposed statistic from, that nuclear is the most expensive form of new energy, when, as Dutton pointed out, countries that use nuclear have cheaper power? Well, from those ideologically opposed organisations. For example, in April, the CSIRO released a report saying nuclear energy was far too expensive for Australia to even consider. However, as Director of Energy Research at the Centre for Independent Studies, Aidan Morrison pointed out, who we are going to speak to in a minute, by the way, the CSIRO's approach to costing nuclear energy is deeply problematic. They have chosen to sample just one particular project of one particular reactor design, a novel reactor design, of one particular scale of reactor, small, in one country, the United States. This project hasn't yet been built or delivered any power and was recently cancelled. Yet nuclear technologies today make approximately 10% of global electricity in 32 nations from more than 400 operating reactors. Choosing such an isolated, first-of-a-kind, incomplete project of a developmental design as an example isn't suitable for serious and objective analysis. Similarly, the Smart Energy Council conducted a cost analysis of what it would cost possibly to build the coalition's proposed 7 nuclear power plants, and it came up with anywhere between 116 billion and 600 billion Australian dollars. That's a pretty broad spectrum, if you will, but nonetheless expensive whichever way you squeeze it. And to be fair, the countries using nuclear energy, such as France and Canada, have cheaper power because their nuclear plants are already built and wired up to the grid and have been for a long time. Just like Labor's proposed transition to renewable energy will jack up power prices in Australia because of the cost of the infrastructure required to put everything in place, so will the Coalition's plan, as the cost of building the power plants will at least in part be passed on to the taxpayer. So why then is Labor so upset about the expense associated with Dutton's plan for nuclear, but perfectly happy to bill the Australian taxpayer the same or more for his silly renewables bet? Labor's plan to pump Australia's electricity grid full of 82% renewable energy by 2030, a plan which is already behind, by the way, is very expensive. Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen puts it at $121 billion.
The question asked by Peter Dutton in Question Time today and not answered by the Prime Minister was, what is the total cost of the government's energy plan? Is there a straight answer to that question?
$121 billion is the cost of non-customer-owned generation, transmission and storage, as is outlined in great detail in the last version of the Integrated Systems Plan. That'll be updated later this week, but that's the figure.
Now, the problem with that $121 billion figure, however, is that it doesn't take into account any of the projects already proposed or underway, or the money already spent, or the money private citizens have spent or will spend on things like solar panels. If you account for all the extra costs, Labor's plan could possibly cost somewhere between 1.2 and 1.5 trillion Australian dollars between now and 2030, according to Net Zero Australia and the University of Queensland. So, in the Great Australian Nuclear War of 2024, who wins?